Welcome to New Jersey Politics with Laura Jones. I am Laura Jones, and we are so glad to have you here. Today, we're going to be looking at the upcoming midterm elections. What are the races to watch here in New Jersey, and what are the issues motivating voters? Patrick Murray from Monmouth University is standing by. First, though, we are taking a look back at the life of former Governor Jim Florio. The state recently mourned the loss of former Governor Jim Florio, who served as governor of New Jersey from 1990 to 1994. His communications director during that time was John Shore, and he joins me now on New Jersey Politics. John, it's so good to see you, and it's a huge loss for the state of New Jersey. I was wondering if you, yes, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's good to see you, Laura, and it is a loss, and it was sad, and I've been doing a lot of reflecting over these past few days.
Right. Well, when you think of Governor Florio, right, we call him governor, but he was in the state legislature. He was in Congress. He was a boxer. He was in the Navy, but we call him Governor Florio. But for you, what comes to your mind when you think back of your time working and knowing Governor Florio?
You know, I think a lot about not just the accomplishments like banning assault weapons and cleaning up the shore, but I also think about the person. I know that to a lot of folks who only saw him on television or at a distance, Governor Florio seemed like he was kind of had a stern exterior. But when you got to know him, he was down to earth and really humble. I'll never forget the time that my assistant buzzed me one day in my office, and she was a holdover. She'd worked in the Payne administration, and she said, "John, there's a Jim on the line. Would that be the governor?" And I was like, because he didn't say, "This is Governor Florio." He said, "This is Jim. Is John there?" And that's one of the things I really remember a lot.
Well, and I had a similar experience in that whenever I would have him on the show, or actually I interviewed him right after he ran and lost for U.S. Senate back in 2000 against Jon Corzine. I asked him to do an interview, and he said, "Come on by my house." And again, he was very humble, and he showed me around his home and couldn't have been more gracious.
He was very proud of his tomatoes.
Yes, I got a tour of his garden and his tomato plants. The tomatoes are, I'd heard. That was the other thing I'd heard about Governor Florio. Loves to grow tomatoes.
Well, you know, he used to talk about his grandfather having a fig tree in his backyard, and I think that was in the genes. And he liked gardening, and he liked a lot of things that just wouldn't have. Most people wouldn't have been aware of. He was an avid reader, loved to learn and talk about history, and really a very multidimensional person.
Yeah, well, a lot of people will remember him or know him, like, you know, when you're doing those bullet headlines, is the governor who raised taxes, and he didn't win a re-election because people were so angry about him having to raise taxes. So can you tell us a little bit about your role in his administration and, you know, and your thoughts on that?
Well, my role was to help tell the story of the great things we were doing, which didn't always go so well. He did. He raised the income tax and the sales tax. The state was facing a real economic crisis, and it fell on him to give people the bad news that the state's books were not balanced. The state Supreme Court was about to rule that you'd have to shut down the schools if we couldn't find a better way to make sure that kids in economically poor areas got as good an education as anybody else. And his view at the time was, that's what I was elected to do. People would say, well, why don't you wait? Let the Supreme Court rule first, and then you can blame it on them. And his view was, I was elected to make decisions, and that's what I need to do. And of course, the other one was banning assault weapons. And you make a good point. He was the governor who raised taxes more than any other, and he ran against Christie Whitman, who promised the largest tax cuts ever in New Jersey history. The election turned out to be decided by 1 point. But the other thing that's really interesting there, and it came out later, is that, as you can imagine, the NRA was very upset about the assault weapon ban, a ban that still stands today, even though the federal ban has expired. And they knew they could never beat him on that issue. So they did a lot of undercover, surreptitious helping and forming of the so-called tax revolt, Hands Across New Jersey. And I'm not saying people weren't upset about taxes, but I would argue that if he hadn't banned assault weapons, he would have won re-election. He was getting past the tax issue, and the NRA wouldn't have come into play. That said, banning the assault weapons was certainly the right thing to do.
Right. Well, and then that's the kind of person I feel like I'm reading about, after someone passes, I'm reading a lot about people's experiences. It was not to say he took one for the team, but those were the values that he lived by, and if it cost him re-election, so be it. Am I wrong on that, Reed? Like, he almost kind of knew, if this cost me, it's the right thing to do. Was he a person who put the best interest above his political career?
Absolutely. I would say that he liked politics. He was a politician, but he loved public policy. He loved trying to solve problems. I remember one time we went to a briefing that the Treasury was having on the new state budget, and the governor came to that. And when it was over, a long-time Treasury staffer came up to me and he said, "No governor ever went to these briefings before." He really wanted to know. He wanted to get things right, and he had. It's true that he knew, well, you could lose if you do the right thing, but he also had a really strong faith that given time, people would get it. People would realize that you didn't elect me to give you easy answers, to give you slogans, to tell you everything's all right if it's not. And so, as I said, we lost that election by a point. After at one point when he was in office, I think his popularity was 20% or something. So we came a long way and almost did it.
Yeah, well, what are some of your best memories from your tenure with the governor? Because we know what was put out in the press, but there's always a story behind the story, and it's a real person, a man, a father, a husband. Yeah. Any memories or stories you are so inclined to share?
Couple of things. For one thing, he had a really biting sense of humor, which he didn't use in public, and that was probably a good idea. He was a big fan of Woody Allen. And it gets back to what I said before. I remember a politician in New Jersey once saying, "If you work for so-and-so, I won't fill in the name, you'll carry his suitcase. If you work for Jim Florio, he'll carry your suitcase." And that's really the way he was. If we'd been out somewhere late at night, he'd always tell the troopers, drop John home first. I can go home later. And one time I remember our phone at home rang about 9 o'clock at night, and my wife answered it. And she put her hand over the mouthpiece and she said, "John, it's Jim, and he sounds mad." And I'm like, uh-oh. And I pick up the phone and I go, "Hello?" And he goes, "I'm not mad."
He heard her.
Yeah, exactly. So it's for me, it's really a combination. I think his accomplishments were fantastic environmentally, assault weapon ban, starting to get New Jersey's finances back on the right track. But he also was really kind of a pleasure to work for because he treated people with respect. I was told early on and by a colleague, and I learned as well, that the fastest way for Jim Florio not to want to hear your advice anymore was if you agreed with him too much.
Oh,
he really wanted people around him to tell you what they thought. And I can think of times when, he said, "Well, I'm going to sign this and, we're going to have to write a press release about it." And I said, "Well, let me tell you why that's not a good idea." And when I was done, he said, "I'm not going to sign it." And it was something I don't think he wanted to sign in the first place. And I helped give him an excuse. But that's the way he was. He really wanted other people's viewpoints. He wanted to discuss things. Now, in the end, the buck stopped with him. He was going to make the decision. He might follow your advice and he might not, but he always wanted it. And you always knew that you needed to give him your honest, true thoughts about something. And you never wanted to dance. It was always like, "Well, I don't know, but I'll find out." Not, "Well, I kind of think this or that." And to that day, I'm that way as well. And I think that's one of the things that he taught me. It's surround yourself with people who know what they're doing, listen to them, then make your decision.
Even as a rookie reporter, and I would get nervous before I would interview any governor. And some of my colleagues would say, "Well, listen, the sign of a good leader, they are going to expect you to challenge them, and they're going to want you to bring up these issues, to bring up the opposition, because they want to be able to discuss this." And he was like that. I didn't see him in my interactions getting defensive. He could be passionate. He could have that fighting spirit. He was a boxer many years ago. But I definitely saw that side of him, that he seemed that he wanted reporters to challenge him and hold him. He didn't back away from that.
He had a lot of respect for the media, and he didn't always get along with them, and they didn't always cover him in ways that that was maybe as nice as it could have been. But he always, part of his belief was participatory democracy and a media that is going to go out there and tell the story and give people the information they need to make up their mind. I remember one time he told me when he was just a kid, this was like in the early 50s, he said, I wanted to read the newspaper to find out about Stalin and his overthrow, and the front page of the Daily News was all about crime in Central Park. And he really wanted people to understand things. And, one of the last times I had lunch with him was around the start of the pandemic. And he told me that he had just reread The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, which is a book that was about that thick. And it really troubled him because he saw a lot of parallels with Trump. And he was very concerned about how things were going. And I went out and read the book, and he was right. And so he was always sharing that his what he learned from history, his belief that if people had the answers, had the information, they could make up their own minds. I think when he was sometimes angry at the press, it was if he felt like they were trying to make up people's minds for them.
Right. Well, and on that, what do you think his legacy will be? Well, let me rephrase that. You were saying how the last time he was reading about the history. What strikes me is what a gentleman he is, though, about whatever the topic is. If you were to engage him on current events right now, he never seemed to really sling mud, right?
No, and he really understood.
Statesman. I hear the word statesman a lot.
Yeah, I think that's right, because he understood things that are going on today in the larger context of history. And I think that informed him. When you talk about legacy, his son Christopher said something beautiful at the memorial service. He said, when I went to college in Boston, the Charles River was polluted. And now they have swimming races in it. And I think of him every time I walk by it. Because his, both in Congress, with the father of the Superfund legislation, as governor, cleaning up beaches and making sure we had safe drinking water, that is absolutely a legacy, as is the fact that New Jersey bans assault weapons at a time when the federal government hasn't got the guts to do it. And those are the kinds of things that I think really stand out.
Yeah, I mean, because Bill Clinton modeled the federal legislation on the New Jersey model that Governor Florio signed. So ultimately, what do you think that legacy for Jim Florio will be here in New Jersey?
Making the right decisions with the long game in mind, not worrying about what happens tomorrow or in the next election, but what are we leaving for the generations to come?
Yeah. John Schor, thank you so much for coming in to share your stories and to share your memories with former Governor Jim Florio. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Laura.
Recently, I sat down with Patrick Murray, a pollster from Monmouth University, to talk about the upcoming midterm elections. What are the races to watch, and what are the issues motivating voters? Let's listen in on that conversation. With the midterm elections just a few weeks away, all eyes are turning towards the latest polls as voters look to see which party and which candidates have the edge. Joining us now to discuss the latest polling and what it all means for November is Patrick Murray, director of the Monmouth University Polling Institute. It is good to see you. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
It's good to be with you, Laura.
All right, when we talked last spring, last summer, you talked about how all eyes of New Jersey and the country would perhaps be on New Jersey's 7th congressional district, and that is where incumbent Democrat Tom Malinowski is being challenged by Republican Tom Kean Jr. So is that what people are looking at? And what are they saying?
Yeah, that still remains one of the hottest races in the country right now, even though some of the underlying dynamics have shifted a little bit since we last spoke. Going into the summer, it looked like it was going to be a wipeout for the Democrats, and that this is one of those seats where you almost certainly see a Democratic loss. That has shifted a little bit as we've been talking about over the summer, with particularly with the Supreme Court decisions around abortion and gun control, and as well as the economy, which is going up and down, but prices have come down a little bit, particularly gas prices, which were the key indicator there. And that's opening the door for some Democrats and making this seat a little bit more competitive than we thought it was going to be earlier in the year.
Looking at the U.S. Supreme Court decision on Roe versus Wade, does that impact, well, those in New Jersey, women in New Jersey, it didn't really change access here in New Jersey for a woman's right to choose. How is that playing out? Does it benefit the Democrat, Tom Malinowski, more than the Republican, Tom Kean Jr.?
Yeah, the key there is that no, it's not going to change the law in New Jersey, but what does this mean about national politics and where we're going? This is where Democrats are having success, is in tying the Dobbs decision, that abortion decision, along with the gun decision, to a whole kind of package of saying, what's the Republican Party about? The Republican Party is about their value system, their sense of what is morally right and wrong, what rights you can have, and that the reason why it's playing in New Jersey, even though it's not going to impact our abortion laws, is that it's part of that issue. What if Republicans take control? This is what we can expect more of down the line. And I think this is where Malinowski has potentially a bit of a wedge there that he can hold against Tom Kean, because it's not that Tom Kean necessarily wants to take away abortion rights, but that he's going to be a reliable vote for the Republicans anytime these issues come up. That's what we're seeing played not just in this district certainly, but we're seeing this play out in many districts across the country.
Yeah. Well, speaking of other districts, are there any other races in New Jersey that you're keeping an eye on?
No, I think because of this small shift towards the Democrats, and it's starting to ebb back a little bit, as we would expect in the fall. But it's just enough to take some of the seats that we might have paid attention to if we were expecting a Republican tidal wave, such as the 11th district, Mikey Sherrill's district, the 3rd district, Andy Kim's district, or maybe even the 5th district with Josh Gottheimer there. That could have potentially been in play if there was a Republican tsunami, but that does not look like that's going to be happening right now. So that gives them a little bit more breathing room. And it's one of the reasons why here in New Jersey, almost all eyes are on the 7th district right now.
Right, right. Well, nationwide, Democrats are seeing their numbers move up in tandem with President Biden. So is there anything more that you can make of that shift, or reading into the numbers when you're polling people what they are talking about? Certainly a woman's right to choose, Roe versus Wade is a big issue, gun rights, a big issue. But people, we're in a recession. People aren't able to pay their bills, and they often blame those who are in power. They don't care who's in power, but whoever's in power. So, can you talk to any of that and how that is factoring in to people's potential decisions come November?
Yeah. The economy, the cost of living, still #1 issue here in New Jersey, across the country. That has not changed. It has, though, however, softened a bit from where it was in the earlier part of the year. What that means is it's still a negative for Democrats, but is not as big of a negative as it had been. So it's not the overwhelming issue. And if Democrats can claim that even though the economy is not as great as we might want it to be, we've got it going in the right direction, which seemed to be the message that was happening last month, although that may shift right now with the stock market crashing recently. But the message is, look, we were in a horrible situation during the pandemic. We expect some bumps, but we're righting this ship. So you might not be completely happy with us, but you know that we're heading in the right direction. So let's look at some of these other issues that you should also be concerned about. What Republicans are hoping for is that the economy basically doesn't get better in the next few months, gets worse in the next few months, and they can turn the issues to that, as well as crime and immigration, which are some key issues, particularly in some more affluent parts of the state as well as the country. These are issues where the Republicans are hoping that they can get people to turn their attention to say, these are the important things that we're concerned about. And so maybe we'll go with the Republicans on those issues because we're not happy with the direction that they're taking. Even if the economy is improving, maybe we're worried about crime. Maybe we're worried about some other things.
Yeah. Are there any keys voters should be looking out for as some of these final polls start to come out before Election Day? You know, we've seen other elections where it doesn't look like something will be close, and then lo and behold, Election Day comes and it is a lot closer than people predicted.
Yeah, take all the polls with a grain of salt. They give you the basic contours of what's going on. If you concentrate too much attention on the horse race questions, then that's the question of, who you're going to vote for, candidate A or candidate B, and who's ahead by how many points. But look at the other questions, the questions about what issues are important to people. Those are the things that they're going to fall back on and say, even if I'm saying right now I might prefer candidate X, how enthusiastic am I about that candidate? Because there's some other issues that are bothering me that I don't think candidate X is as good on. So that's why we're seeing some things that are popping up, like immigration as an issue, like crime as an issue, that are things that may go against the grain of where the polls are saying the candidates stand right now.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up immigration, because that is something that did take over a lot of headlines, is the immigration issue. You know, we've been talking a lot about Roe versus Wade here in New Jersey, kind of impacting what has happened. But what about immigration?
Yeah, I mean, that's an issue that certainly we've seen it in the headlines recently with the governors of Florida and Texas moving some illegal immigrants across the country, hoping to bring attention to this issue, because even if they're getting initial negative press on this, their hope is that that sparks people to think about, oh, are immigrants going to bring crime into our communities? This is the kinds of things that we might be worried about. And that might be more important than our concerns about what might happen with abortion or some of these other issues, which the Democrats are hoping that you can get people to focus on. Remember, at the end of the day, it's not necessarily a candidate A and candidate B arguing over the same issue about who's better on that issue. It's them arguing about which issue is more important to voters, and trying to get voters to think that the issues that they're stronger on are the more important issues in this upcoming election.
Yeah, and a lot of that can be determined by who has more money to get their messages out there by way of paid media, advertising.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. There's a combination of things. There's the ability to get your message out there, but it takes money. Isn't everything. You have to be savvy about this. You have to understand where the attacks are going to come from. You have to be able to blunt those attacks very quickly in order to pivot back to your message and get people to pay attention to it. One of the things that we are seeing across the country where Democrats are doing well is in situations where they have very good candidates and the Republicans have fielded very bad candidates. Here in New Jersey in the 7th district, that's not exactly the kind of thing that's going to help Democrats. Tom Kean has run a fairly low-key campaign here, but he's running on a reputation of being a moderate Republican. He's known to many of those voters in that district already as a state legislator. So, Tom Malinowski doesn't have the benefit of having one of these really bad Republican candidates that some others, Democrats, are fortunate enough to face off on across the country.
Yeah, bringing it back to New Jersey, back to the 7th districts where all eyes will be watching. Patrick, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
My pleasure, Laura.
All right, thank you. Coming up next week on New Jersey Politics with Laura Jones, we're going to be speaking to State Senator John Bramnick, who represents the 21st Legislative District. Now that takes in parts of Morris, Somerset, and Union counties. And we're going to be talking about the issues he's watching at the State House in Trenton, plus a TV show many are watching on Netflix that's based in his backyard in Westfield, New Jersey, called The Watcher.
You're a Republican, to get anything posted, you're going to have to work with Democrats. Has that, or does it cause you problems within your own party sometimes?
Well, if I act reasonable and I don't act crazy, sometimes the crazies in my party go like this, you can't compromise. Really? Well, if you look at the voting of our country and in our state, sometimes it's 55-45 or 52-48. Bottom line is, not everyone thinks the way you think. That's why you need legislation that's a compromise. I find that when you have compromise legislation, it's reasonable, smart legislation. So if people want to say, oh, he's too moderate, he's too friendly with Murphy, like this, what I'm doing is I'm doing my job. I'm not going to be a nut, and I'm not going to sound like a nut. And if they don't want to vote for me, that's fine. But I'm never going to be a crazy.
Have you watched the show? What do you think?
Yeah. Well, the show, I got to tell you something. I didn't see any houses like that in Westfield. Now, we have some nice houses, but over the water, I mean, I don't know what Westfield they're talking about.
Yeah.
Also on the show, we have a special conversation with the one who sets the legislative agenda in the lower house, the Speaker of the Assembly, Craig Coughlin.
Yeah, we passed in the budget a $2 billion property tax relief program that is going to be in effect. You start to see it now. People should have gotten now.
Right. So what should people be looking at? Like I saw something come in the mail and it said anchor.
Yeah.
And I said to my husband, I said, pay attention to that. It's not, it
Right.
isn't junk mail, right? So people
Yeah,
are getting in the mail, it's anchor. And anchor, it'll
Is it?
say anchor on it.
It'll say anchor, exactly right, and it'll be a form to fill it out, and there are income eligibility requirements. The 2 million people in the state of New Jersey should benefit it because it also applies to renters. So if you're a renter out there, don't toss it away. It applies to you as well. And so those are out now, and the goal is to get those checks processed, well, obviously as fast as we can and be in place for January.
And that will do it here on New Jersey Politics with Laura Jones. I am Laura Jones. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you back here next time.